Good evening, everybody, and welcome in to a special later at night edition of the Lions Grid. I'm your host, Kevin Marhoney, and I have to apologize. Originally, I said we were going to be going live on Monday, but as you know, if you saw the previous episode of the Lions Grid, I was dealing with COVID, and so on Christmas Day, we were still under quarantine and couldn't risk having the family over. But on Monday was actually the day the quarantine was lifted, so feeling much better now. Family was able to come over yesterday. My mom and dad, and we were able to celebrate a little bit because we weren't able to do so on Christmas Day. So that's why we didn't have the episode yesterday, and so we're making up for it today. It also gives it another day to sort of simmer because that was a painful loss for the Lions. I don't want to overreact. I don't want to underreact. We're going to try and keep things pretty straight laced for you as we sort of talk about the game and sort of what it means for the Lions moving forward. But I think first thing you have to do is I do like to take a look at things in the bigger context of where they exist, because I don't think you can take a single game in a vacuum and really say it has a huge impact on a franchise. Um, I'm not going to make too much out of it, but just taking this particular game out for a second and looking at it, it was just a whole lot of stank, right? It was something where there was so much momentum. We were feeling so good about the Lions, and then they came into this game. They went down to Carolina, where it was the coldest temperature they've ever had to play for a home game, and they just got clapped. They got smacked. They were not able to really do anything against the Panthers. Um, and really, the Panthers were able to do a whole lot against the Lions. We'll talk about it in a second, but they were successful running the football. They were successful throwing the football. It was a tough game for the Lions, who coming into that game, they were on that 6-1 streak, on a 3-game winning streak. We're looking really good, looking like one of the hottest teams in the NFC, looking like that team that could make that playoff push that you didn't want to run into. And then they just got smacked in the mouth by the Panthers. And those things that I warned you about the Panthers were the things that ultimately were the Lions' downfall. And we'll talk about that. But it just, for me, like I said, I'm not going to overreact. I'm not going to underreact about this game. Haven't expected the Lions to make the playoffs, even this season, even with them making this miraculous shift now on the 6-2. Or now going 6-2 over their last 8 games. Is that opportunity there? Yes, it has been, and we've been making sure that here on the Lions Grid we talk about how they have that opportunity to make the playoffs. But just because they've had the opportunity doesn't mean that I've been expecting them to capitalize on it, right? But up until this weekend, they had been making the most of their opportunities. So that's why I think it's a little bit frustrating for Lions fans after this loss, because for the last few weeks they've been making the most out of their opportunities, out of their chances, and this week it's set up to be a potentially, as we talked about on Christmas, the day before Christmas Eve, or on Christmas Eve morning. It was set up to be a potentially fantastic Christmas day for Lions fans, right? They could have secured a wild card spot, and helping them out, the Giants lost, the Commanders lost, and Seattle lost. So they could have jumped up in the NFC playoffs and claimed a spot. Now, when I say claim it, they would have taken the lead. They would have taken over the spot. They wouldn't have locked it in, but it would have been theirs to lose. Now they're still trying. They're playing catch up, trying to get one of the 2 remaining spots, but those still belong to the Giants and the Commanders, respectively. And so, it's a tough thing having to win out the rest of your games, especially with the number of games that the Lions had left. It would have taken a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-game winning streak to close out the season. That's a tough thing to do, especially when you're a team who, again, we've talked about how the defense has played better because they've been winning. The offense has been taking really good care of the football, and the defense has been forcing the other team into making mistakes. And that positive turnover differential has really made a big change for Lions defense that hasn't gotten more talented players on the team. They've just had rookies step up, and they've had people step up to make plays and force turnovers, and then the offense has played, they've taken care of the football. And that has been the difference in the games that the Lions have won versus the games the Lions have lost. this season, and that's been their recipe for success, and that's the recipe for success a lot of good teams use. It's the same one the Eagles use. The Eagles are a team where if they're not turning the ball over, and their defense will cause the enemy team, their opponent, to turn the ball over. If they can make sure they're taking care of the ball, it will put them in position to win games. That's what good teams do, and it's what the Lions have done to be successful on this during their winning streak. But it was something they weren't able to reproduce here against the Panthers. And I think one of the big reasons why, and one of the things that I warned about, though I had no idea it was going to be this bad, was the running game. And I think the thing that hurts the most about the running game was the fact that, earlier this season, the Panthers traded away Christian McCaffrey. So the running backs for the Panthers are not their top tier guys. And as a team, they ran for 320 yards. Last week against the Jets, as a team, the Lions gave up 50 rushing yards. Against the Minnesota Vikings, who have Dalvin Cook, they gave up 22 rushing yards. That's 72 yards across 2 weeks. The week before that, when they were playing Jacksonville, who they blew out, they gave up 95 yards. Still, between those 3 games, nowhere near the 320-yard total that they gave up to the Panthers. And they gave up career days, like the career rushing mark days, for both Foreman and Hubbard. Foreman now has his best days 167 yards on the ground, and for Hubbard, it's now 125 yards. That is unheard of. Not only giving up the career rushing yards for one running back, but for both of them in the same game, that is a special type of awful. And I part of it just maybe of how the game worked out. As we look back at the games against the Jets and the Vikings, the Lions were able to get ahead in those games, and then the other teams were playing catch up, and they were forced to throw the ball more often. Whereas the Panthers, they were tied 7-7 at one point in time, and then as we'll talk about, the Jared Goff fumbled happened in the red zone, and from that moment on, it was pretty much all Panthers. They never trailed in that game, and they were able to continue to run the ball and didn't have to deviate from their game plan. And they had a lot of success, a ton of success. And it's painful to see because it's one thing to have your opponent have a good day running the ball, but to have 2 career rushing days and give up 320 total yards on the ground, that's not what good teams do. That is not a recipe for success. It hurts, and they very much, I warned that their rushing attack was good because we have seen them have success with this backfield they have, but nothing like this, and we hadn't seen the Lions give up yards like this, and it was a perfect storm of, you had a strength of the Panthers offense coming up against what had become I think the run defense was already known to be weak, but it was something that hadn't been exploited in a couple of weeks. So I think it sort of it definitely wasn't top of mind for me. I sort of knew that we had to watch out for the rushing attack, but I would have guessed in a million years 320 yards on the ground. That's just crazy. So kudos to the Panthers. And as mentioned, one of the reasons we already talked about, one of the reasons the Lions have been successful over their winning streak has been the turnover battle, and they lost it. And we talked about Jared Goff's fumble in the red zone. It was the only turnover of the game. And like I said, I think big picture, not only did it stop the Lions from either getting a touchdown or a field goal on that drive, but it sort of changed the pace of the game. It was 7-7 at that point in time. Had the Lions been able to score there, that would have put them up 14-7, and the Panthers would have been playing from behind. And who knows how that would have changed the course of the game went. Conceivably, they would still probably continue to run the ball because they were having success doing that, even though they would be down a touchdown at that point. A touchdown isn't too much, but the Lions, I think, are a team, especially here in the last couple of weeks, that have looked their best when they're playing with a lead, when they can sort of dictate to other teams how they want them to play the game, as opposed to letting teams execute their game plan and play the style of football they want to. And that's what the Panthers did in this game. The Panthers knew how they wanted to approach the Lions, and they absolutely stuck to that game plan. And the Lions couldn't do anything to force them off that. They couldn't get a turnover. They had no sacks in the game. There was nothing they did to really upset the flow of what the Panthers were doing, and that allowed them to um, you know, execute the plan they had before them. And as you can tell from the outcome, the Carolina coaches had a good plan. They won that game 37-23. Really shut down again what had been one of the hottest teams, not only in the NFC but the NFL. And now have Lions fans wondering, is this the same old Lions? Are we back to being where we were previously? And as I mentioned, I think it's I think a look at the whole context in one game. We're not bringing back same old Lions. I've heard that a little bit listening to the ticket over the last couple of days, hearing those reactions about how it's the return of the same old Lions and about how Dan Campbell and company haven't killed it. And I will be honest, I don't think that the Dan Campbell and this particular regime have done enough to kill the same old Lion stigma. They have been doing a lot towards that. But to me, that requires more than just what you do in this season, right? They certainly have shown that they could turn around and fight and that they are building in the right direction. But I need to see what you do next season, right? You can come out here and have this turnaround in the second half of this season, but if you come out and you're awful next season, like what does it matter? That's the same old Lions thing right there. So, I'd love to see. I don't think this is SOL. I don't think this is showing that it isn't dead or that it is dead. We're not there yet, right? The Lions, to show us that they are the franchise that we're looking for, to be a team that can compete each and every year, not only for a playoff spot, but heaven help us, a Super Bowl. We need to see more consistency out of them, and that's going to take seasons, and to do. That isn't something you're going to do with a single game. There's not going to be a moment where you look back and be like, "Oh, that was the one moment that the Lions needed to turn their franchise around." It's going to take several moments. It's going to take several wins like the ones they had against the Minnesota Vikings recently and the Jets. They're going to have to do these things consistently. And one of the things they're going to have to do is, as they're trying to make the playoffs, is beat division rivals. And so this is going to be, I think, important to see how the Lions close out the season. You just got punched in the mouth. You had one of your worst games of the season where your defense just stank. They were awful, terrible. What are you going to do these next two games against division rivals? You have the Bears at home, and then you travel to Lambeau Field, a place where in my 32 years of existence, you have won, I think, twice. What are you going to do against these two teams? Now, you are going to be favored against both these teams. Um, I think you do have to be careful because you did just get gashed for 320 yards on the ground. So the Bears, when they come to town, you're going to have some sort of answer for their running attack, because not only do they have good running backs in David Montgomery, but, they also have a very mobile quarterback. You're going to have to do something with Justin Fields, and he tore us up for 140 some odd yards and two touchdowns. Excuse me, COVID. The two touchdowns on the ground when we played them earlier this season. You're going to need an answer. And you just showed against the Panthers that the running defense for the Lions, yes, in previous weeks it had sort of flown under the radar because other teams weren't able to take advantage of it or expose it. But guess what? That is a raw exposed nerve at the moment after giving up 320 yards to the Panthers. The Bears saw that. They saw that what they were able to do. And I think it's going to be something where it's going to be interesting to see how the Lions respond next week. Again, not only having to deal with the threat of their running back, but also what Justin Fields can do running the football from the quarterback position. That's not going to be easy. So here, you want to, again, as we're talking about how you put an end to the same old Lions business, you come out here and you beat the Bears. If you sweep the Bears this season, fantastic. If you sweep the Packers this season and do it by going into Lambeau the last week of the season and beating this team that you have, it's something that the Lions don't do. They don't go into Lambeau and they don't get wins. If you do this, these are the type of moments that build towards that turnaround you're looking for as an organization. But then it has to continue into the next season, and it's not that the momentum carries over. Like your work doesn't stop just because you did it last season, right? You have to continue to improve, to continue to beat teams in games where you historically haven't. And it's going to be interesting to see if the Lions can do that. And I think a big thing is going to be how they finish out the season against the Bears and the Packers. Because again, these are two division opponents. They are games that the Lions could easily lose. I think they're games where the Lions are going to be favored in both of them, but they are not going to be gimmies. And after they just got smacked in the mouth by the Panthers, it's going to be interesting to see if this team has the toughness to come back out here and close out the season and get the wins they need to give them an opportunity to make the playoffs. I'm not expecting them to make the playoffs, but if they can come out here and show that they are a team that can come beat these two division rivals and do things that they don't historically do, I'm going to feel really good about this team as we head into the 2023 season. I do think it's also worth mentioning, we were talking about how bad the Lions were. Jared Goff continues. Yes, he did have the turnover. And I think the thing that's painful there is that Jared Goff has done such a good job taking care of the football. He hasn't thrown an interception in several weeks. Um, uh, the fact that, you have, what is it? Since their 1-6 start, he's thrown 12 touchdowns and no interceptions. But he had that fumble, and that fumble, of course, happened on the exchange between himself and Frank Ragnow, our Pro Bowl center. Like, if you're going to have a turnover, you're not expecting it to be there between those two players, especially at that moment. As you're in the red zone, it hurt because Jared Goff overall has been playing amazing. As I said, since the 1-6 start, Goff has thrown 12 touchdowns, no interceptions. This week he went 25 42 for 355 yards and 3 touchdowns and no interceptions. He's playing excuse me, he's playing fantastic. And the offense is looking really good. The running game for the Lions has seemingly disappeared, which is something a bit concerning as a team. We talked about how the Panthers had 320 yards rushing, and the Lions only had 45. So at the moment, we're really putting a lot of the onus onto the passing game, but that can happen because if you look at how the pace of the game turned out, with that turnover in the second quarter, the Panthers ended up scoring, and then they had another touchdown and a field goal. And so really it was excuse me, 24-7 at halftime, which means the whole second half, the Lions are playing catch up and needed to really rely on the passing game to even have an attempt to come back, have a chance to come back in that game. So, just like how we talked about with the Lions during the winning streak being able to force teams off of their game plan and on to playing on the Lions' terms, the Panthers were able to do that to the Lions. And with that meant that the Lions had to be throwing the football. They weren't able to establish a running game because they needed to score points. They needed to get yardage because they were down 24-7 at half. And it was a game of catch up, and it sort of forced them to sort of abandon the run, which is something the Lions have done to other teams during the course of their turnaround. So the Panthers sort of outdid the Lions in terms of a lot of the things that the Lions had been doing to opponents on the 6-1 run. The Panthers did that to the Lions, but Jared Goff did answer the call a little bit. Again, he did have that turnover, and that turnover was the only turnover of the game, which makes it particularly impactful in the moment that it happened, preventing the Lions from going up. The momentum in the course of the game certainly was definitely impacted by that turnover, and it's really hard to understand or fully calculate how much so. But it's something where, as mentioned, he's 12 touchdowns, 0 interceptions since their 1-6 start. He's been playing well. I think he's been playing well enough to guide them to the playoffs like I said, a big thing here as we take a look for this upcoming game against the Bears is going to be how are they going to address the Bears' rushing attack, having to deal with their running back and their mobile quarterback. Because as the Panthers just showed, this rush defense has not improved. They've just been able to dictate to other teams to make them rely on their passing attacks more. And maybe that's it. Maybe they can get up early against the Bears and force them to have to throw the ball and sort of abandon the run. But with Justin Fields throwing the football, it's just as easy for him to take off and run. So it's a little bit harder, I think, when you're going up against a quarterback who's mobile, because even if they are in pass first mode, it's easy for Justin Fields if everyone's covered to take off and sort of get those big runs and sort of gash the defense because just of his what he brings to the table as opposed to a more traditional pocket passer. So it's not going to be an easy task, but again, I think the Lions can and should be favored these last two games of the season. At home against the Bears, and then even on the road in Lambeau against the Packers. Of those two games, if I expect that, if I had to guess which one they would drop, if they were to lose a game, certainly I think you've seen the Packers seemingly wake up a little bit here. I think Aaron Rodgers is having a little more faith in his receivers. So again, because the Lions have not historically done well in Green Bay at Lambeau Field, I think that that's going to be a tough game for them. And of the two, that's the one I sort of give the Packers an edge. But it's again, I think they have opportunities before them. You just need to come out, beat the Bears, beat the Packers, and let's see where we're at because the Commanders and the Giants have both shown that they're not necessarily equipped at the moment to close the season out with wins. So if you can finish your season with wins, it puts you in. It's all you can do. It's really all the Lions can do is try and win these last two games and give themselves a chance to make the playoffs. Again, I don't expect them to make the playoffs, but it would be I think a good um, I think it would be a good moment for them, especially because it would mean that they were able to sort of shake off this stinky, smelly loss to the Panthers and show the fortitude necessary to sort of rebound and keep pushing on to football that means something. So I'd love to see it, but we'll take it one game at a time. And first up is the Chicago Bears this weekend. So we'll come live to you for the pregame episode as we take a look at that matchup. But this has been today's episode of the Lions Grid as we've sort of recapped the stinky smelling no good game that was this past weekend's game on on Christmas Eve against the Panthers. As always, we're coming to you live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, and Twitter. So if you are a fan of the Lions Grid and did enjoy the show, whether you're watching us live or watching the recording, please search for the Lions Grid on any one of those platforms. Like, follow, and subscribe to our channel, and we appreciate your support. I'm Kevin Marhini. This has been the Lions Grid. We'll catch you during the next episode. Have a good night, everybody.